All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome everyone to another Carbonite webcast where today we will teach you how to take on physical migration like a pro. This is the first in a three-part webinar series, so be on the lookout for part 2 and 3 in the next coming weeks. My name is Ty Bartholomew and I am the Migration Campaign Manager here at Carbonite, and it is my pleasure to be the host today. Before I go any further, I do want to go over some house rules. You'll all notice that you've been muted upon your entry, and this is done on purpose, so we don't have any background noises that can be distracting. However, we do encourage you to chat amongst yourselves in the chat box in the GoToWebinar interface. Also, feel free to ask questions at any time. Send them directly to me or to the panelists, and we'll try to get to as many as we can before the end of the hour. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to all of you in attendance, so don't feel like you have to frantically write down notes as you go. So without further ado, let me introduce the first guest speaker. Tanya York is the Supply Chain Risk Advisory at BSI. She is an award-winning continuity expert and has orchestrated continuity planning programs for healthcare, financial services, and the security software industry. She's led over 153 disaster recovery and IT emergency response tabletop exercises for 7 years while at McKesson. The exercise covered thousands of servers, hundreds of applications, and encompassed hundreds of BCDR plans. While at Charles Schwab, Tanya was fully accountable for ensuring the uninterrupted functioning of mission-critical worldwide operations for the $872 billion brokerage firm. Tanya has also held senior-level positions at U.S. Bank, Comdisco Continuity, Symantec Veritas, Seagate Services, and the Caspian Group. She's also the founding member of the Business Recovery Managers Association in the San Francisco Bay Area. And finally, we have Ray Sullivan. With over a decade of experience developing product strategy, messaging, and marketing materials for technology companies, Ray Sullivan leads Carbonite's product marketing efforts for backup and disaster recovery. She spent her early years in her career as an electrical engineer and product manager for the consumer electronics and enterprise storage industries. Bringing technological acumen and a passion for marketing together, she dives deep into understanding the technical challenges that IT groups face and how they leverage backup and disaster recovery solutions to solve them. So with that, Tanya, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ty. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you joining us today. As you know, the objective of this webinar is to discuss data migration. We thought it might be helpful to look at the challenges of migrating data, replicating data, and moving data by examining the evolution of disaster recovery exercises. Ray will be going through the solutions that Carbonite has to support your data migration needs. Since there are two of us presenting today, it would be really helpful if everyone could hold their questions until the end of the presentation. So with that, let's begin. Is someone going to advance the slide? It's not advancing on my screen, so I just...
Yep, it's on. It's advanced to the white screen.
Okay, thank you. So let's go back in time. We don't quite need a time machine made out of a DeLorean that goes 88 miles per hour. Whoops, wrong movie. Instead, let's use our memories, imagination, and some images from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Remember what tests were like in the past. Some of you may, and some of you may not. We called them tests, not exercises. We had to travel, whether it was across the town or across the country, to get to a physical recovery location. We had to go to a place. There were usually multiple days, so we had to stay overnight. And at one employer, I had one colleague who was afraid to fly, so he had to leave days in advance to drive to the recovery location. Once we got to the hot site, and that's what they were called in, and they're still called that in physical recovery, data center recovery locations, we had to get people signed in, badges, and we had to put them in their respective rooms. Not all the groups had access to the whole environment, so the badges only allowed them in perhaps work area or in the telco room and such. There had to be food and lots of it. We had to have caffeine, sugar, and salt, the 3 food groups. And if we didn't have those, the test coordinator would be mugged by the team. And then there was the data, getting the data there, and that meant tapes. For some of you might have no familiarity with these. So in the lower right-hand corner, those are actually cassette tapes. So those are all a lot nicer. If you've seen the recent Hidden Figures movie, when they're in the room with the IBM mainframe and those big round devices that have the round discs on them, those are tape drives, and those are what it used to be that we had to deal with in moving. And they had to arrive at the hot site. So that sounds somewhat simple, right? You just have to get to the tapes, the hot site. But many times they'd be delivered to the wrong location, or they'd be delayed. And if you didn't have the data, you couldn't do the exercise. And because the data is an asset and it has confidential information, you had to find the shippers that could ship that data that were authorized, or you had to ship in double custody and had to have 2 people sign for the shipment and support the shipment the whole time. So it was very complicated. Now, in order to recover, you need three things minimally. You need data, people, and a place to go. So while teams were together on site, they could focus 100% of their efforts on DR. So the way the test used to look, the scope was limited to individual platforms. So you might have somebody tested the manufacturing platform at one time of the year, and someone tested the HR environment at a different time, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a tremendous amount to coordinate, and it was, you scheduled these in advance at the hot site. It was difficult to change. And when you were at the hot site, you had to deal with these kinds of logistics. You had to have security badges. You had to have your plans. You had to have your charts so you could track the progress of the exercise. You had cell phones. That picture on the left, that's a cell phone, right? So for some of you have no idea. We used to call them the brick. They don't fit in the average handbag, and they were not very many people had them. You were pretty special if you had them. You had to have the tape containers. The tapes were locked with a key, and often the keys didn't work or the keys were lost, so then you had to have the bolt cutters to open the keys. You had to check the tapes in, and once you got the tapes checked in, you had to hang them up, and they had to acclimate, because if the tapes weren't the right temperature, if they were on an airplane and they got cold, they wouldn't load in the tape drives. And I'd been at many an exercise where I watched somebody, lick her fingers and put it on the tape headers to try to get them to be able to load and read. Recovery plans, were printed in binders, and you had to have physical copies of those. Everybody had a copy, and you had to ship those in advance, or everybody had to bring their own and make sure they kept them in their possession. And communication was very difficult. It was usually limited to whoever was there, because it was just too hard to reach out and tell everybody what was happening and where you were in the process. And the tone was often hurry up and wait. So you'd get there, and the part of recovering the data was always the biggest challenge, and it took a long time. The testing back in the day, there were some benefits and there were some challenges. Now, the benefits of that kind of testing was everything was brought together in a nice, neat package. You had your data, you had your people, you were all located together. Everybody could really focus on what they're doing because they couldn't work on their activities from back at home. They were really, chartered to address just one thing in front of them. And, we came together as a team and bonded, which was, an important team objective and working towards the same goal. Now, the drawbacks, there were some drawbacks to this, right? Often, recovery required being in the rooms physically with the equipment. It was loud, and in the back of, water-cooled computers, and some of you might still have water-cooled computers, it was very, very cold. Some people used to put their lunch under the raised floor because it was so cold they didn't have to use a fridge. So it was very cold. As the exercise progressed and we'd have issues, the updates were made manually on the Gantt charts on the wall, and we'd be scribbling on and taking notes. And then at the end, you had to get all that stuff together and compile it and make, tell a story. A communication, as I said before, was limited to the group, so you really weren't communicating to management about the status of the exercise. It was really expensive to send a team to travel. I recall budgets between $50,000 and $90,000, and this is in the late 90s being the norm. And people always complained about something, the hotel, the plane, that there was always something that was wrong. And we were always missing data. We were almost always missing data. And that was a big deal. So in some exercises, I can remember spending entire weekends, 48, 72 hours exercises, where we just didn't even get completed recovering the data because we'd have a problem with a tape drive, or we'd have a problem with a tape, or we'd be missing data. And in the case where you'd be missing data, it's not like we had a lot of options back in the old days. Typically what would happen is we would call back to the production data center, see if they could find the data, and then they would box it, secure it, take it to the airport, put it on a commercial flight, and ship it counter to counter, where we would go to the other site and get the tape. And this is all, of course, if there's enough time for the exercise, because in these physical hot sites, exercises were scheduled one after the other. It wasn't like there was a lot of free time so that we could go overtime to make up for mistakes. So with all that in mind, you can say that things have certainly changed. Not only has technology landscape experienced revolutionary change in the past few decades, but managing IT continuity has become infinitely more complex. At the same time, those same revolutionary technology changes have given us, the IT community, a whole new set of tools with which to work. Of course, you have to be really careful when you're navigating the waters of change. You're really never supposed to turn your back on the ocean. So how has this manifested? We've really gone from testing from a single location to with a single data center environment, with everybody being together on site, to everyone, data people being everywhere. So what does this mean to us? Well, logistics are different, certainly. Recovery of the data is different. Preparation is different. Communications are different. The challenges are different. And testing is different. With people spread out all over, they often don't meet face-to-face for years. Who on this call hasn't had that experience where you've worked with someone for years and you have no idea what they look like? There are challenges of dealing with people that you never meet in person. The same kind of challenges in doing this webinar. How do you engage people and communicate people that are everywhere and get them to participate? And what do you have to account for to plan in advance? At one employer, I worked the longest time with this gentleman, and his voice on the phone, he sounded just like Tom Brokaw. I mean, talk about enabling trust and confidence, right? And then when I met him, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I met him, and he didn't look anything like Tom Brokaw. And I was almost annoyed with him, like, you are just not what I pictured in my head every time you talk. So, you know, we're dealing with people that we may never meet. So how are we going to be able to do this? How are we going to be able to deal with this? Well, technology is the problem, but of course, technology is also the solution. So, well, I mentioned hidden figures, so we all can't have a NASA-type control center, right, where we can see everything. But we do have a lot of options available to us. So telepresence, it allows people in multiple locations to interface like they're in the same room. So a lot of you belong to organizations that have that capability. We've got video conferencing from Skype, GoToMeeting, instant messaging apps. It's pretty amazing. FaceTime. You know, the thing about that is, again, there's a new challenge that you have to deal with. So I was working with one gentleman, and I was using Office Communicator, and I accidentally hit the video. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at him at his desk. He was working from home. I felt like I was doing something, like I was some voyeur and peeping Tom. I felt so bad. I was completely flustered. No one understood why I was flustered on the other side. I'm trying to cover my own camera on my laptop. So, you know, we always have to be careful about what our setting is on our devices when we're using those video conference tools. We have cell phones and bridge lines, right? We have VPN and we have webmail, and we have cloud recovery solutions allowing for ease of recovering data anywhere. And we have different kinds of data backup tools that allow us to do everything from replicating to moving data centers or workload, from physical to virtual, virtual to virtual, virtual to physical. And of course, Ray is going to talk a lot more about that. And then we adapt to change in our lives. And the same goes for exercise needs in DR as well. After all, imagine where we'll be in the next 5 years. So how do you tackle this challenge? If you're accountable for conducting exercises in your organization, how do you tackle the challenge? Well, you know, these are based on my experiences, and bite the bullet and try to schedule all the different platforms at one time. So instead of having these exercises that are individual with all the different platforms, because everything is now much more spread out and not running on a mainframe computer, this makes testing much more realistic. So despite them being in different platforms, they're usually in the same data center, and you really want the exercise to reflect how it would be to recover. So, you know, there's a saying of testing as we recover and recover as we test, so that you're not just creating an exercise that, you know, we can pretty much create any kind of exercise to pass it. But it's more important for it to really demonstrate what an actual recovery is like, and then be able to take that data and make the necessary changes to your program. So how do you do this? Well, first decide on some type of repetitive schedule. Semi-annual testing is realistic. There was mention that in past life when I worked at Charles Schwab, we tested on a quarterly basis while I was there. It just depends on your organization, what your palette is. But if you don't test except for once a year, with the rate of change in technology, that's just not realistic. So you're often faced with, if you have only one exercise a year, you're dealing with all these changes that have happened to the production environment, and you end up troubleshooting all of those in one exercise. And it limits your ability to really get through all the objectives that you have of the exercise and take a good evaluation of where you are in your program if you're dealing with so much change and trying to troubleshoot all that. Set specific dates. In this example here, we talk about like July and January. You want to avoid peak processing times and gain commitment from your executive leadership. That's always a key in anything that we do in our organizations. But if you have their commitment to a standardized testing schedule, it really makes the process much easier. And then plan your exercises to match your recovery time objective. So if you're supposed to recover in 24 hours, your exercise should be for 24 hours, and you should exercise as you would in a real event. Back in the day when those hot sites had lots of time, you could go in and you could schedule your 24-hour exercise for 3 days in a row, and you'd work for 8 hours, and you'd go back to your hotel. And that's really not the case anymore. So you have to start really exercising within the constraints that you'd have to recover in. So how do you do it? Well, as we talked about, you get agreement on semi-annual exercises. You get standing dates set up. In this example, we're using the last weekends in January and July. You get executive management to commit and really remove barriers that real or imagined about testing on specific timeframes. Socialize with release management, right? They're, again, talking about the rate of change that happens in organization. So there are often lots of releases that are happening. It's hard to coordinate an exercise, slipping one of those into the regular schedule of production happening. So work with them. Work with the change management group to get a change freeze for a certain amount of time so that you're not dealing with as much change as you can end up dealing with if you don't do that. And it gives a window for the folks that are participating in the exercise to be able to address the changes that have happened since the last exercise without having to worry about the day before the test, somebody put a change into this code, and now they have to troubleshoot that as well. Get on the change approval board or whatever it's called in your organization so that you can hear about what their plans are and ensure that the objectives of the continuity program are included. Coordinate with your business and vendors to get them to participate, because in a real event, if you really needed help, you might be calling in on your rep from Oracle or Microsoft or EMC or Carbonite or whoever. And so if you get them to participate, it helps them understand what's going to be expected of them, and again, brings more realism. And, socialize it within the organization by printing some save the dates. Those save the dates things aren't just good for getting married or getting engaged or having a baby shower. They work for the office as well. So what would this look like? In the example that I'm showing here, we've got a data center in California that recovers to an internal location in Georgia, as well as to IBM in Sterling Forest. IBM and SunGard, and there's probably some others, but those are the big ones, provide hot site facilities where you can recover using shared equipment. And then exercise personnel in this example are in California, Texas, Georgia. Recovery vendor personnel are dispersed at Sterling Forest Pacific and then remotely, as well as other business partner vendor locations, and here they're in Illinois and Mexico and India. And then there are personnel who just support from their home. In the example that I'm giving, the total exercise participants are 250 to 300. So many of those people in the United States, they work from home. This is what's required to recover 500 to over 1,000 servers within a single coordinated exercise. So how do you coordinate with 250 individuals? you do it with tiered management support. You have your, functional teams, and you have team leads, and because you certainly don't have 250 to 300 people on weekly, planning meetings for the exercises. So that really helps in also creating ownership of the program within their functions, but helps the people who are executing the coordination of the exercise. And then there's a lot of other tools and things that we use to be able to exercise. So we use things like on the left-hand corner, you see polycoms, right? So we use for this kind of distributed exercising, a lot of it's virtual. There's a few people in a data center somewhere, but everybody else is everywhere else. So there's a main bridge line, and there's all these subsequent bridge lines. And so the main bridge line is for, kind of general events, and then you have separate bridge lines. So, here's the network bridge, and here's the Windows bridge, and here's the Linux bridge. And so when you have specific issues to those groups, they go off and they get on their bridge and work through their issues. You have production notification tools, Mir3, Notified, whatever you use in your own production environment, you can utilize for their recovery exercises, because it's important to follow what you do in operations so that you're not having to teach people how to do something differently at a time when they're stressed, and it's easier for them to execute what they would normally do. You also have a tool for plan development. SunGuard has a tool called Assurance. There are many different kinds of tools depending on the size of your organization and the complexity. But the key is, how are those plans developed, maintained, exercised, and updated after the exercises when there's discrepancies found, which there are supposed to be discrepancies found during the exercises. We also used an event management tool in this exercise, and there's a company in the Bay Area called WinWire, and WinWire created a event management tool via SharePoint. So it's a SharePoint-based tool, and it was really critical in allowing the level of sophistication that we needed to manage all these people at all these different locations. So it had a check-in and check-out procedure. So because everybody's remote, it's not like they're coming in the room saying, "Hi, I'm here to work. Is it time for me to restore the network? Is it time for me to restore the databases?" So you build a workflow into the SharePoint tool, come in to participate in the exercise. They sign in, they're available to work, and then as they do their task and complete them, then the next person's notified and they know what their task is. A toll-free status line. There's this old saying called a belt and suspenders, right? Pants up. Like today, I have using my iPad for this presentation, but to my right is my good old-fashioned laptop running it as well, because I'm always going to have two things in place, because that's how I roll. And in an exercise, a good old-fashioned 1-800 number for somebody to call to check status should they not have access to the event management tool or need information is also something that is good to have. Create a mailbox, an email box for communications that come from the continuity program office, so that people are used to seeing those. Use those email communications during the exercise. It allows for keeping everybody up to date and having the appropriate level of visibility. And then using email and messaging tools. One of the big big needs that we have during an exercise is, communicating, again, with people who are everywhere. And the messaging tool that was used here was Office Communicator. But without that, these technologists are everywhere, wouldn't be able to really get their job done. And ensure the entire IT continuity office, all the people support the exercises, because it takes a village, and in a real event, it would be all hands on deck. So that's really what has to happen in this environment where the technology is everywhere and the data is everywhere. So, for sure, testing is more complex, and it's much more challenging to engage remote resources. And everybody is strained because, as all of you, I'm sure, experience, you have more to do than you have time to do it. On the upside of this kind of everything is everywhere environment, it's more realistic with people scattered where they would be, because that's what they would be in a real event, right? And then time for travel isn't required. You can participate in the exercise in your pajamas, in your bedroom, or in your car on the side of the road with your, iPhone. It's easier to model real disaster with multiple technologies affected, because that's what would happen. You wouldn't be testing. You wouldn't just have an event that only affected, one technology within your data center. It reduces the cost and time associated with travel. It's easier to identify multiple individuals to participate in testing, again, because it's easier to get more participants when you don't have that constraint of cost and travel. It also exposes to hidden constraints. In this example that I used here from one of the organizations that I was with, there are a couple gentlemen that were single points of failure. And so as you started to lay everything out, how is so-and-so going to be able to recover these 4 different platforms at the same time? So, and that was really helpful from a production, a day-to-day issue management is, people need to be trained in these disciplines in order to support that, because in a real event, they can only do one thing at a time. And then all the tools that we have to move back up and manage data virtually. So when we forget data now, when we initially, in this exercise, we recovered at IBM, and there was data at IBM while we used the data replication tool from Carbonite to recover or to migrate the data to IBM, and we used it to migrate data to different cloud providers as we addressed some cloud needs. We used the tool to recover internally and test internally. So that has really helped manage the requirements for dealing with such large quantities of data that have to move everywhere. So now Ray is going to talk to you about the cool tools that Carbonite has for you to manage migration of your data and the other challenges that you have with moving your data. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ray.
Thank you, Tanya. So Tanya just took you through all of the challenges of migrating data, replicating data, and moving data using disaster recovery exercises as an example. So I'd love to talk to you about the Carbonite solutions that can really support your data migration needs. So let's just start with a quick overview of Carbonite's data protection portfolio. Our mission at Carbonite is to enable a world in which important data is always protected, available, and useful. And together with our vast network of partners, VARs, and MSPs, we serve thousands of customers and protect hundreds of petabytes of data. So here is our high-level overview of our portfolio. We have solutions that span legacy, physical, virtual, and cloud systems, offering traditional backup and disaster recovery, and also high availability solutions. And we offer a data migration solution called Carbonite Move that's built on the same technology as our high availability product that Tanya just mentioned. So let's start by talking about why migrations are so important and how they can be challenging. So the risk and downtime associated with server migration have locked many IT teams into platforms that are not ideal. Migrations can be scary, and so sometimes we either avoid them altogether or delay them longer than we should. Whether it's moving data to the cloud from physical or even from the cloud, from physical to the cloud, or even just something as relatively straightforward as upgrading a piece of physical hardware. This results in a lot of lost opportunities and unnecessary costs, and really a lack of agility that today's IT teams can't afford. So, what is Carbonite availability and migration? Carbonite Move, which is our migration product, quickly and easily migrates physical, virtual, and cloud workloads over any distance with minimal risk and near zero downtime. Move is a true any-to-any solution. So that means that you can move your physical data to a new piece of hardware, or you can move your physical data to a virtual server, or even up to the cloud. This solution is so flexible, and it takes what is typically a manual, tedious, and risky process and really kind of streamlines it down so that you don't have to worry about losing or corrupting your data or suffering downtime. So let's take a quick look at how it works. The basic premise is that Carbonite Move replicates your source system to the target system, so wherever you want to move it, using 256-bit encryption to pass data over the wire. It uses real-time byte-level replication to create a replica of the data, applications, database, or even the whole server that you want to migrate. So once you've done the kind of initial seed, the replica is kept in sync with the initial system, mirroring all changes, including permissions, attributes, file names, deletions, and encryption settings. So you essentially have two functioning systems at that point. Test cutovers can be done at any time without impacting production systems. This is huge. In fact, end users can continue using the source system until the moment you cut over. And many times they won't even realize that you've done the cutover. Thinking back to what Tanya was sharing earlier about all of the planning and kind of coordination associated with testing or exercising, imagine going through a migration and not even having an opportunity to test the environment before cutting over. That's what a traditional migration looks like. But with Carbonite Move, you don't have to take that risk because you literally have an exact replica of your data in the target environment, and you can test to your heart's desire before you actually hit that button and do the cutover. So in addition to the benefits I just mentioned, what are the other benefits? Structured, repeatable migrations with near zero downtime and no data loss. We cannot stress enough the idea that you don't have to take your primary system offline for minutes, hours, days in some cases, like you would with a traditional migration. This allows you to essentially fail over on purpose to your target system. This also allows freedom from lock-in to a specific piece of hardware, or actually, we're talking about physical data today, but Carbonite Move also allows you to move from physical to cloud, physical to virtual, or even between clouds, between virtual platforms. It is truly flexible, and when we say any to any, we truly mean that. As I mentioned, easy, non-disruptive testing and streamlined and automated migrations. We have very wide platform support, as you can see here, physical, virtual, and cloud platforms. So let's see here. So yeah, That's pretty much the gist of Carbonite Move. I'm happy to take questions. Tanya and I are both happy to take questions, whether you want to product specific or just about the presentation in general. And of course, here we have our contact info if you'd like to get a demo or get really into the weeds with some of the technology.
Well, thanks, Tanya, and thanks, Ray. That was a great presentation. I have a couple questions that did come through. The first one is, yes, this webinar is being recorded and it will be sent out later today or this week with the full recording in the video.
Ty, you sound a little bit far away. Could you get a little closer?
How's that?
Much better, thank you.
Much better.
All right. Yeah, so I guess to reiterate the last question, this webinar is being recorded. It will be sent out to everyone within the next day or two, so be on the lookout for that. One question that came over about the product on Move was, do you have to perform a final synchronization before cutover?
No, you do not. The systems are kept in sync automatically with the software within nanoseconds. So it's all automated. You don't have to do anything proactive about that.
Okay. Another one that came in was, does your product perform a two-stage migration using a repository to store data while in transition, transformation, or single-stage process?
It's a single-stage process. So the data is sent over the wire, and there is an initial seeding process, but the data is it's not stored in any sort of primary and then secondary location. It's directly sent to the source target.
Okay. I have one other one here. Does your product use image-based backup to migrate data?
No, it does not. It's byte level replication.
All right. Well, that was all the questions that I had that came in on my end. Once again, I'd like to extend a thanks to our guest speaker, Tanya York, and as well as to our speaker, Ray Sullivan. As I mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, this is the first of a three-part series. The next one will be covering all things virtual, and the last one will be covering the cloud. So look for those webinars coming in the next few weeks. And with that, I thank everybody for attending, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye.